Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. We are expecting more folks to join us, but we don't want to start late. We have definitely enough information to cover the 90 minutes that we have scheduled, so we want to go ahead and begin. So you are here for our webinar, which is the Introduction to Significant Disproportionality and the Four-Phase Process for Programmatic Improvement. You'll be hearing from us. My name is Connie Silva again. I'm the Director of the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Project, which we all refer to as SPP-TAP. And we have Jack and his team from CDE, who you also see on the other screen. So you're going to be hearing from both of us today. Keep wanting to say this morning, but it's afternoon now. Okay. So anyway, there's a couple other pieces of information I want to share from the very beginning. We are recording this session. So if you have colleagues that were not able to join you or other folks that you know ended up having to miss this webinar, please reach out to us following the event. We'll be able to share the link for the webinar, and it will be captioned so it can be accessible. And again, we have folks monitoring our chat as we're going along. That will be where you can place questions, or if you're having any issues, I can see that someone can't hear. Speaker a little bit more. But in any case, we are monitoring for questions, so if we don't respond immediately to your questions, there will be places in the webinar where we will pause. So, but we may also be interrupting folks, Jen and Susan, that are here with me on the SPP-TAP team, know to interrupt us if there's a question that's specific to what's being discussed in the moment, and we want to catch that before we move to the next slide. Okay? So let me go ahead and move slides, and we're going to pass things on to Jack.
Hi there. Everybody hear me? We good?
We can hear you. Yes, we can.
Hey.
Yep.
So I appreciate everybody coming. My name is Jack Brimhall, and we'll get into some introductions here in a minute, but we're talking today about significant disproportionality, the four-phase process. The agenda, we're going to do some welcomes, some introductions, objectives. It is a federal mandate if you are in significant disproportionality. So we'll talk a little bit about California implementation of federal requirements, the state of disparity in California, supports through the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Project, and the four-phase process.
Okay, so I just wanted to remind people, I think you only see me on screen, but our whole team is here. We are a small but mighty team. Susan Stewart, who's our program specialist, is here by the side, and Davina Gallen, who's our administrative assistant. She's the person that you would have gotten the email invitation from, and who you will hear from regularly about our events that are available to you. And then Jen DeShazer, who is our systems coordinator. So we are here either on camera or behind the scenes, and we're the folks that you'll be seeing and hearing from regularly.
Okay, and so again, my name is Jack Brimhall, and I'm an administrator you're going to hear FMTA a lot, and for those of you that haven't heard FMTA, it's an acronym for the Focus Monitoring and Technical Assistance, and I'm FMTA 4. We also have FMTA 1, and then right now I'm the interim manager for both FMTAs. We have a great team. We have an experienced team. We have Barbara Gaskin, James Durgan, Shirley Wagel, Dr. Sean Halland, Baron Reynolds, who, if his name pops up, he actually is leaving us for a different job in the department, so we're sad to see that, so we have a vacant there. We have Jasmine Eiton, and so that's FMTA 4, and I kind of explain how this is broken up here in a little bit. And then with FMTA 1, again, I'm the interim administrator for FMTA 1 as well. We have Keyshawn Thortona, Lisa Boje, Brett Gillespie, Brad Lacey, Monica Pekovarich. Sorry, did I get it right? Was that close? Pekarovich, sorry. Josh Rucker, and then we also do have a vacancy that we're filling right now. So here in a little bit, I'll share kind of how we're broken up across the state. and how you'll know who your FMTA consultant is, because that's going to be really important that you get to know your FMTA consultant, because they're going to be able to assist and guide you. So if you can share in the chat, because we do have a lot of people live right now, your affiliation, a lot of you have done this, LEA, SELPA, whether you're a CDE, SPP-TAP, if you're a TA facilitator, your name, those with you, the indicator or indicators that you may be out in, and if your LEA is new to significant disproportionality.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for doing that as you've come in. As Jack said, people I know have done that from the very beginning. It's helpful for folks just to see you're part of a community here and who else is around the table, even though we can't see each other. So thank you for doing that.
We have a lot of people. That's good. Okay, so the objectives of today. You're going to learn about California's implementation of federal requirements regarding significant disproportionality. Again, it is a federal requirement, so if you're in it, we're here to help, but that's why we're doing it. The process for development and implementation of a comprehensive, coordinated early intervening services, what we like to call CCEIS plan for Sig Dis. So you'll learn about the process for developing that plan. You're going to learn about supports available and the next steps that you'll need to take. So at CDE, it's California Department of Education, if we look at the next slide, we're broken up into a variety of regions. So we're actually broken up by CCEIS regions. So the California County Superintendent's Educational Services Association, and there's a map. So those are those CCEIS regions. You can see that there's 11 of them. So FMTA 1 has roughly half of them. There's 11, so it's hard to cut it in half, but roughly half of them, and then FMTA 4 has the other half of them. And so we've broken those regions down by consultant. So typically, for example, Shirley Wagel, who's here, she has Region 10. So Riverside, San Bernardino, and a little bit further north. Other consultants, like Monica, has Region 11. Because Region 11 is bigger in terms of folks, we have also Brett is part of Region 11. So more than likely, the region you're in is going to correspond with the CDE consultant that you get. With that said, the numbers don't always shake out perfectly, and we have to look at equaling out the work across the state. So there may be a chance that you will get a FMTA consultant that's not for that region. More than likely, when you go and you look, you'll be able to see that if your FMTA consultant's Region 9 and you're in Region 9, more than likely that'll be your consultant. But there are some exceptions. So I hope that makes sense for everybody. We have a great group of people. So we have 14 consultants. We have ex-superintendents, administrators. We have just a group of people that I think as you get to know them, you're going to really be impressed with. They care. This work they're passionate about and they care about it, and they're here to support you. So it's important that you figure out who your FMTA consultant is and you get in touch with them, and we'll also get in touch with you either way. So there's that. So let's kind of get into some of the meat of what we're here for. So we're looking at disproportionality. Disproportionality is the overrepresentation of a particular racial or ethnic group in one of four areas. So you can be disproportionate in special education in general, special education within a specific disability category. So it could be white and emotionally disturbed. It could be speech and African American, a variety of things. The third way is through discipline, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and how that works. And then also for least restrictive environments, so having students in a more restrictive environment could get you into significant disproportionality. The state performance plan indicators. So a lot of you, if you've gone through the performance indicator review process, or when you look at your indicator report card, you're familiar with the indicators. If you're not, you should get familiar with them, but there's 17. And so if you look at the education code, so states are to monitor, we have to monitor 1 through 17 of those indicators. Essentially, that's how you're graded on. Some are quantifiable, some are qualitative. There are 4 of those 17 indicators are based on disproportionality. And this is all from IDEA, the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, and that provides for the identification of districts with significant disproportionality. So when we look at discipline, if you're significantly disproportionate in discipline, we're talking about students with disabilities that by race and ethnicity, suspended or expelled, greater than 10 days outside of school, less than 10 days outside of school, and then here's one a lot of people don't know about is the greater than 10 days in the in-school setting, or less than 10 days in the in-school setting, and any discipline. If you look at placement, so this again is the least restrictive environment, and if you have kids in a more restrictive environment, so we're talking about students with disabilities by race and ethnicity spending less than 40% of the school day in general education. So again, less than 40% of the school day in general education. Students with disabilities by race and ethnicity also either in separate schools or residential facilities. So those are 2 separate things. If you look at indicators 9 and 10, that's disproportionality overall, so the percent of racial and ethnic disproportionality, and 10 is disproportionality by disability. So again, the percent of racial and ethnic disproportionality depending on the disability that the student has. So, significant disproportionality is the overrepresentation in one or more of the 4 areas of disproportionality. So you could actually be significantly disproportionate in more than one area, or you could just be in one area. It could be in the same area within the same population, and if it's for 3 consecutive years. If you look at the identification, placement, and discipline, the age groups are 3 to 22. They all use the alternate risk ratio and the risk ratio. We'll talk about that a little bit if you have the data questions. I'm not the best statistician, but there is a formula that's used. The threshold on all of those are 3. So this is a number or an email you probably want to write down. Stephen Rogers is a consultant here at the California Department of Education. Very, very bright guy, very easy to work with, and he is part of our data team. And so if you have specific questions about the data, he's a good person to email. He gets back to you quickly, and he can answer any of the actual formula type questions or the data side questions. Okay, so significant disproportionality requirements. So we talked a little bit about the CCEIS plan. So if you're significantly disproportionate, you are going to have to create a CCEIS plan. And that plan, part of that plan is to set aside 15% of your IDEA funds. That 15% is specifically targeted to early intervening services. we can talk a little more about that. So if you look at the actual kids, where they, the group of kids that ultimately factored into you being significantly disproportionate may be older kids, but you still may want to use your early intervening funds at an earlier age, because that's really the key with the early intervening funds. It's to hopefully utilize things and create programs so that in the future you're not significantly disproportionate. LEAs will submit quarterly progress reports, and this is important. You must contract a minimum of 10 hours with the TA facilitator, and you'll get to know the list of the TA facilitators, but per indicator that you're out. So if you're out in one indicator, you will have to utilize a TA facilitator for a minimum of 10 hours. If you're out in two indicators, then you're going to have to utilize a minimum of 20 hours. 3 would be 30, and if you were out in all 4, I don't think we have anybody out in all 4, but that would be 40. So you'll want to take note on who those TA facilitators are. We have, because of the change in the formula this year, there's more districts that are significantly disproportionate, and it's the feds that wanted us to use a different change in the formula. So it may be a little bit tougher to get those TA facilitators, so I recommend that you really, that's something that you get on very quickly, is finding who your TA facilitator is going to be.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started and talk about federal requirements, but I do want to touch on a question that was put in chat, which is someone asked about basically early intervening services, and how does that work when you are a high school district, because we have high school districts that are identified. So that's a very good question. The federal regulations actually ask that the services be provided, prioritized in age 3 through grade 3. Obviously, if you're a high school district, you don't have age 3 through grade 3. So it doesn't mean that you cannot spend. In fact, you will need to spend the money on services for students in your high school. It's just, it is a recommendation, or it's not even really a recommendation, it's a guideline within the regulations that if it's possible that you focus on the earlier grades. So it's a very good question. I also saw that folks asked about technical assistance facilitator. We are going to talk about that some more later in this webinar, so definitely we will answer those questions. So what I'm going to do next is go over the federal regulations. Jack, I think, described how folks were identified and what California has done. We want to talk about where that comes from. Where does the mandate actually start? So just moving the slides forward here. Here's the Code of Federal Regulations and where you can find the information. And the CCEIS plan and the moving of the monies has always been a piece of the regulations. What's different now is this particular statement, which is that LEAs must identify and address the factors contributing to the significant disproportionality. And then they actually list up a possible what those factors might be. So we actually, through the process of developing a CCEIS plan, we'll take you through a root cause analysis process, and that's so that you can identify those factors and then create a plan based on that. So I won't read the bullet points for you again, but the point is that you do a root cause analysis, and that is part of the federal requirements. Another piece is that an LEA must address a policy, practice, or procedure that it identifies as contributing to the significant disproportionality. This is different from what you have done in terms of review of policy, practice, and procedures when you're identified as disproportionate. With significant disproportionality, you're actually talking about some systems change and some changes to the services to students. So you are going to be changing policy, not necessarily all of this, but practice or procedure. And so it is a review that you do and then report publicly what changes you have made. An LEA, as Jack mentioned, needs to reserve 15% of those Part B IDEA funds, and those funds are, here's what's actually written into the regulations, as we said, to serve children from age 3 through grade 12, and paying attention particularly, but not exclusively, to children in those groups that were significantly over-identified. So that means including children who are not currently identified as needing special education or related services, but who need additional academic or behavioral supports to succeed in a general education environment. And that definition is very important because not all students need additional supports. So when we work with you on identifying who those students are that will receive these services, we will spend more time talking about specifically in your LEA how you might define those students. This group can include children with disabilities. It cannot be exclusively for children with disabilities. So again, when we support you in the development of your CCEIS plan, you'll get more information about how to do this appropriately. So some of the timelines that are important to keep in mind: the CCEIS plan is due to CDE on August 15th, 2020. That's the current deadline for the plan. And then following that, as Jack mentioned, there are quarterly reports and expenditure reports that are due. And the first one would be January 10th of 2021. The CCEIS funds, because they are federal funds, as we mentioned, they're from Part B funds, they have a 27-month life. So the period that you are actually identified is 27 months. So those quarterly reports will go through October 10th of 2022. That will be the end of the 27-month period. Actually, the end of the 27-month period would be September 30th, but the report would be due October 10th. And all of the funds must be expended by the end of those 27 months period. There is no possibility of extensions on the funding. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the state of disparity in education in California. We have to have, again, we have limited time with you today, so we won't provide slides on data points at the federal level, but we do know that this is not an issue that is specific or unique to California. We are one of all of the states in the U.S. that have issues of disproportionality in special education, and disproportionality in education, period. So we just want to provide for you some current data of what we do know about the state, what's happening in the state.
Before we get too far into that, we do have someone asking, are these additional IDEA funds or part of our normal allocation?
Okay. So this would be part of your normal allocation. So the funds that you receive under Part B, you need to take 15% of that. And when you actually create your CCEIS plan, you won't know what the 15% is yet because it hasn't been allocated for this year. So you provide your budget based on an estimate from the prior year's allotment. So, and it is the full IDEA fund, so going from preschool. Okay, so thank you for the, again, please don't hesitate to interrupt. We can definitely stop and answer questions. We know they're important. So data, we're looking at suspension data here. This is from EdSource. You can see the site at the bottom of the slide. This is California suspension rate by race and ethnicity. And the yellow bar is from the year 2011-12. The blue bar is 2018-19. And you can see in all of the different racial and ethnic categories that our rates of suspension in California have decreased, an amount that is significant and a lot to be, well, to feel good about. That's progress for sure. But you will also notice, unfortunately, that as those rates have decreased, the disparities between the race and ethnic groups has not changed. And in fact, they're still in the exact same order during that period of time. So that is obviously concerning. Here's another way of looking at it. This is the unequal impact of suspension on the opportunity to learn in California, a report that came out in 2018. Days of lost instruction per 100 students. And again, each of those bars across this graph are based on race and ethnicity, and you can predict year after year after year the order in which the students would be suspended and losing lost days of instructions. And the lost days of instructions in this are only tied to suspensions and expulsions. This is not about absenteeism. So these are the days of lost instructions that we at an LEA level have control over. So there was a question. Is that?
I believe CD has answered it. It was
Okay.
15% of funds every year. How would you spend them out from July to October 22nd when we don't know what to spend?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let me take a little bit more time just to talk about the funds for a minute. It is, the allotment is the annual allotment, so for right now, you were identified right now in 2020. The 15% will come out of your allotment for the 2021 year. However, it is expended over 27-month periods. So what does happen is if you are identified again in next year, you will have another pot of money, your Part B funds from and that would be the 21-22 year. So you could have overlapping funds because the 27-month period obviously covers more than 1 year. But each year you would remove, that you are identified, you would remove 15% of your Part B funds from that fiscal year.
And that is the LEA's allocation, not the SELPA's allocation, right?
That's correct. Now, we know that there are some one-district SELPAs, but basically it is an LEA allocation. So the SELPA, as they distribute to their LEAs, it would come out of that one particular LEA, not the full SELPA allotment. Okay.
And then going kind of back to the data where we were, why isn't data from the more recent years available? We've changed many practices a few years ago, but it's difficult to know if these changes made a difference in recent years since they're not included in the data.
Mm-hmm. So we use the data based on what's available at a statewide level and has then again obviously being able in that direction. We definitely recommend that as you start your own process, you're looking at your most current data. And especially with discipline, you can look at data month by month, not waiting a whole year to see what's available. So yes, that report came out in 2018. We do know from looking at data that is available to us that it is still changing in the same ways that we have been seeing. So unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of change statewide in those gaps. That doesn't mean that an LEA hasn't been making some changes within their own gaps. And so it is important to look at your own data within your LEA and see whether or not what you have been doing in the last couple of years has made a difference. In the state of California, it has not yet shown up, in the aggregate. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving in terms of placement here. Just, again, some more slides on the data that we have from the state. This slide is talking about the percentage of students with disabilities inside the regular classroom, less than 40% of the day. We do not have very many LEAs that are identified in this area, but we do want to show you where the data is right now. This actually is kind of a backward slide, so the columns, the highest columns are actually the worst in terms of meaning that they have less time in the classroom, not greater time in the classroom. So you can see from this slide that the Black or African American students and the Asian students are the ones that actually are spending the least amount of time in the general education classroom. So we have a few more slides from the California School Dashboard, and these are actually the most current, so that were just posted. So this is this current year of data. On academic standards, we wanted to be able to show the English language arts and both mathematics, how our different student populations are performing. So the numbers in this chart are the points below the standard. So the higher the number, the more poorly they are performing. And you can see that the students with the worst performance, unfortunately, are students with disabilities. And they pretty much follow across the board. I think there's one place in which they change in the order. But when you look at the students based on the different categories, they do end up with performance levels in the same order almost. I want to point out that African American students are, in terms of race and ethnicity, at the top or bottom of the list, however you want to think about it. This is only the 7 category of students that are doing the least well. And you can see that the number 7 is socially economic disadvantaged students. And part of the reason we wanted to share this with you is that while poverty does impact disproportionality and our ability to serve students well, it is not the only factor and it's not the largest factor. We have both African American students and American Indian students, regardless of poverty, that are not doing as well as students in poverty of all races.
Do we know what year this data's from?
We pulled it out off of the dashboard just last month,
Okay.
so it's very current.
We did have one other question about like the CCEIS report. We noticed that the due date is August 15th. Is there a reason for it being so early? It's just it forces districts to basically finish the report by June, since July is a dead month for our site and our stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. So, Jack, I think it might be helpful for you to respond from CDE. I do know that the deadline date has been different year to year, and it is something that is set up by CDE based on other things that are happening. So, Jack, if you wanted to talk, I think this is related to the special education.
Sure. So, one of the things that we've done at CDE is we've listened to the field, and in the past, we had a variety of different activities. So a district, for example, could be in significant disproportionality. They could be also in a comprehensive review, and they could be in PIR, and they would have 3 different consultants and 3 different due dates. And so we know that's confusing, and we know LEAs don't love that. And so we've worked really hard to try to align everything together into the special education plan. So you're going to hear this more, but it's the SEP. It's called the Special Education Plan. And almost every district, any district that's out in an indicator will complete the Special Education Plan. And so the reason why the CCEIS plans are due August 15th is because that's when the SEP is due. We realize that's, unfortunately, doesn't give you more time, but it's so that all those due dates align, because part of significant disproportionality is built into the SEP. And so the SEP is due August 15th, so the CCEIS plan is due August 15th. The good news on that is it's going to be a lot easier for LEAs to follow and track due dates, who their consultant is, all those different activities. They're all going to be based around that special education plan. So it's much more streamlined and should be much less confusing than it has been in years past.
Okay. I'm going to stop for a minute because I know we have a few questions that have not been answered. And I do want to say, I mean, this is part of the reason why you probably, in addition to receiving the invitation for this webinar, you've received an invitation for a face-to-face CCEIS workshop that are starting. Actually, the first one is next week. There are a lot of questions. This is some complicated work, and you're asking very, very good questions, and we will definitely have the opportunity to see you face-to-face and respond to more. And certainly, you can also ask questions after the fact, but I think some of the ones that are popping up right now are pretty important. So I'm going to go ahead and answer them, and we'll still get through our material. One was asked about high school district because, again, we do have a good number of high school districts that are identified. And in terms of the funds, I want to be clear, the funds cannot go to other, for instance, feeder schools. So you still are providing services to students that are within your high school. However, when you're doing a root cause analysis and doing work with a stakeholder group, including your feeder schools is a wonderful idea, and it does help you address disproportionality at a more preventative level and will help actually the high school district get out of significant disproportionality. So working with a TA facilitator, you could get more help around what some of the strategies are that have worked with high school districts. So I do want to point that out, but I want to make sure that there wasn't a misunderstanding that you actually could somehow use the funds for other students, because that's not possible. I think one of the other questions that came up was about the alternate risk ratio and the changes in the federal regulations. So the federal regulations did create minimums of what they considered reasonable numbers for using the methodology. It does require a methodology that's the risk ratio. It doesn't allow for other calculation methodologies, and California was previously using some two different forms of calculations for that. So yeah, it did change the calculation to only a risk ratio. And then the alternate risk ratio is for the smaller comparison groups. So they have to be compared at the state level. Again, that's set in federal regulations, so it's not something that California had any flexibility around, other than that they could set the bar even lower. So if California wanted to look at even smaller N sizes, they could do that, but the state is not doing that. I think if you have more detailed questions about your own LEA, as Jack said, probably the best thing to do is to call Stephen Rogers so that you can be talking in terms that are specific to what has happened within your district and not the broader sense. So, okay, I'm going to go back to the slides, and again, we'll stop to answer questions as necessary. So again, these are some quick ones. We're looking at college, career, and graduation, and want to point out that, again, while there's really good news in terms of the graduation rates across the state, even by race and ethnicity, there's been some nice increases and positive improvement in that area. When you compare that to college and career ready, meaning like A through G courses, you don't see the same success rates, and you see much more disparity, again, by race and ethnicity. The reason we point this out is that when we see disproportionality and significant disproportionality in LEAs, it's not a special ed issue. It's a general ed issue, and when we talk more about the process that you'll go through for developing the plan, it's data like this that is why we require collaboration between general ed and special ed. When you do your root cause analysis, you will discover issues that you want to address within your general education environment, and in fact, you are moving that pot of money from the special ed fund to now general education services. So again, this slide just helps make that point. Yeah, and this is exactly what I was getting at, the canary in the coal mine. When you're looking at your data, you will be looking at data that's not just special education data. When you do your root cause analysis, you'll be looking at a lot of general education data to help you truly get at what the issues are. And you will notice, unfortunately, that there will be disparities in many areas in your LEAs.
There was a question, does the LEA or SELPA submit the plans?
Good question. The CCEIS plans are LEA specific. However, the signers, and again, because as Jack mentioned, there's a new special education plan, the larger plan that CCEIS is a part of. I don't know, we're waiting for the final version of that. I don't know how much has changed in terms of signatures, but in the past, CDE has required that the CCEIS plan is signed by the SELPA director. Again, because the funds were taken from the distributions to the SELPAs that were given to the LEAs. So it's signed by the SELPA director, it's signed by the superintendent, it's also signed by the state board, the board of the LEA, so board chair. So I'm going to keep moving, but interrupt me if you need to. So I wanted to talk about our services through the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Project. We are funded through the California Department of Education, Special Education Division, through the County Office of, Napa County Office of Education. So my team that I had introduced earlier, we all work for the Napa County Office of Education to support all of the LEAs in California that are significantly disproportionate, and to support the California Department of Education in providing information to LEAs and SELPAs. So as our services and what we provide, we are part of the statewide system of support. And you know, this may not be the most recent one, because you know the statewide system of support is changing and moving. It's a relatively new support system. And I think there are major improvements in that. And so the work that we provide, I just want to say, is a part of that, and we definitely work with the SELPA leads in making sure that we're providing the most accurate and up-to-date information to folks. And we obviously also make sure that the work that we're providing in terms of technical support is in alignment with the other supporters. So if you're in differentiated assistance, we would want to make sure that our efforts are in alignment with those efforts as well. So here are some of the things that we provide. I mentioned the CCEIS workshops that you should have already received an invitation to. We do 2 of them, a workshop A and a workshop B. Will be coming out between February and March, and then again between May and April. Those are one-day events, face-to-face. We support a cadre of technical assistance facilitators, and those were the ones that Jack had mentioned. I'll say a little bit more about that in just a little bit. We also have forms and documents tied to the CCEIS process on our website. So I know that some of those will be available as when you received your annual determination letter. That letter had links for a Padlet, and some of those forms will obviously be placed on that Padlet. As they are updated, we also keep them on our website, so it's another place that you can quickly download what you need. As I mentioned, we provide individualized TA, so if there is time when you need help and have, again, some of the questions that are specific to your LEA and what's going to be most helpful. We've been doing this work for a little over 10 years, and so we've learned a lot from the field about what strategies work and what doesn't. So we're very open to hearing from you and being able to provide a little bit more information that might help you. We have a community of practice. So this is a virtual, typically quarterly meetings that we do with those that are identified as significantly disproportionate. Those meetings are an opportunity to share resources and learnings. So we invite LEAs to talk about their experience going through this process. We do have them present to each other from time to time. And that's also, it's not just to talk about the successes, but also the struggles. And it's information that gets shared with the CDE, so if there are improvements that can be made in the technical assistance supports, that information is definitely used to improve services. You'll be getting more information about those as we get moving, but just to know, those are quarterly. They're typically an hour during a lunch hour, so it's not a lot of time, but they are very valuable. I already mentioned the website, which is where we have various resources as well. There's online learning, archived modules tied to disproportionality, and also archived webinars. So if you go to the website, there's a lot that you can find there. I noticed that someone asked for the link to the Padlet, and we don't have the current letters. I don't know, Jack, if that's something that someone could put out in chat, if that's something available.
I don't know it right this second, but I know that link has gone out in all those, on the letters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So I'm going to say a little bit more about our technical assistance facilitators. They were selected through a request for applications process, so this was a competitive application process. And as I mentioned, we've been doing this for over 10 years, so some of the folks that have been working with us have been working that full time. We do requests for applications regularly, depending on when we need more in that group. So some of them have been here less than those 10 years, but they have a great deal of experience working with LEAs through this process of the development of the CCEIS plan, and also implementing the activities within that plan to make sure that what was put together as a plan actually is put into fruition, and then monitoring and evaluating whether or not activities actually were met the outcome that they were hoping for. They also, the TA facilitators are vetted by the California Department of Education, so when they applied, there were recommendations based on a scoring system, but then the California Department of Education, Special Education Division approved and vetted those. It's a group that regularly meets with our staff here at SPP-TAP, whether via phone or occasionally we're able to do some face-to-face events. They work very collaboratively with the California Department of Education and our project so that we make sure that there's a consistent flow of information. So if you have, for instance, as Jack mentioned, a FMTA consultant that's assigned to your LEA, that FMTA consultant and your TA facilitator are likely to be in communication. So if there's areas where you need additional supports or there's questions, the information is known across the project, your TA facilitator and CDE. They're provided with regular updates. So we had been knowing about some of the changes in the federal regulations years before they actually went into implementation, and our TA facilitators were aware of those as well. So they were able to help districts as things were changing in the field. So that's something that we do regularly. And they also, because they're a group of incredibly talented and experienced individuals, they support one another. So if you work with a TA facilitator, chances are, especially now when there's a greater number of LEAs that need support, chances are you'll be working with a team, that you will have a lead TA facilitator who will bring in others as needed for small portions of the work, again, to support the work and to help make it more both cost-effective and efficient, meaning that you can support more LEAs perhaps under a SELPA lead or SELPA grouping. Okay, so you can see that the website is right there. We have all of the information on the TA facilitators, including bios and their experience, where they're located, and how to contact them is there on our website. So the TA facilitator requirement means that an LEA is required to contract with the TA facilitator for a minimum of 10 hours, and that's per indicator. So if you've been identified in more than one area, it would be more than the 10 hours, 10 hours per. And if you have somebody else, a consultant that you're working with or you would like to work with, you can get them approved through CDEs. You would contact your FMTA consultant, and there's a brief form that you would fill out again just to make sure that the folks you're working with have some areas, areas of expertise that would include knowledge of IDEA and ability to facilitate conversations around race and equity, and then also obviously familiarity and experience with LEAs in general and how districts work. So just pointing out some of the main areas that are important in terms of when you're considering who would be supporting your district.
We did have a question earlier on concerns about if the TA facilitators aren't available due to the increased number of LEAs in Sig Dis. What is in place to ensure they're able to still keep on their timelines?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we are definitely trying to stay on top of that. As I mentioned, the TA facilitators stay in communication with us. So we, at this point, again, are looking at different ways of serving LEAs so that hopefully that is not what happens. But that is the reason why if our TA facilitators are not available and you want some recommendations for other folks that could support you, I would definitely talk with a TA facilitator, because we have some of those folks, I should mention, are retired SELPA directors, retired superintendents. So they're going to have connections also with other folks in the field that they work with who may be able to support you. So I would definitely consider that. But I would recommend, if you're having those struggles, to please reach out to us, because even though you might be looking, for instance, if you're in the north, you might be looking for people in the north, and there are limited. There are TA facilitators that live in the south that are willing to work with LEAs in the north. So again, please reach out if you're having those struggles. An important thing to consider also in terms of the TA facilitators that are part of our SPP-TAP team, and I notice that this is a question, they, as part of the agreement of working under our support, cap their rates at $800 per day. So basically $100 an hour. That, I know that that's not true of all external consultants, and the folks that do this work are obviously really taking a cut in pay. They could make a lot more money, but that's, again, if you contract with one of our TA facilitators, that would be the max that would be charged you.
And will the facilitators meet the new requirements for contractors in California? No.
So you're asking about the changes in regulations around contractors. They are independent consultants, and you would be paying them yourself on, again, an hourly basis or whatever contract you set up. So that would be up to your LEA to ensure that they meet those requirements, but you're not going to be hiring them as employees, and they are not employees of SPP-TAP. They are not employees of the CDE. So they are independent contractors.
And I know there's other questions that I've missed, but as we continue to go on, I think some of the information will be covered. And if there's time at the end and we have not addressed your question yet, please go ahead and ask it again.
Mm-hmm. I also want to point out that, as I said, we are recording this. We also will be archiving the chat. So yes, there's a lot of questions coming in as I'm talking, and hopefully we're catching, as many, well, obviously catching as many as we can, but we probably are skipping some. Mm-hmm. So as we archive them, and if we pull out ones that we think, oh, we didn't, respond to that, we certainly can reach out in a follow-up email. And again, we know this is going to take much longer than this hour and a half that we have. That's why we're coming out to you face-to-face for full-day sessions very, very soon.
And if you haven't received that email, please email us. Our contact information is here, and so we can make sure you can get that invite to those workshops.
Yeah. Why don't we go ahead and put Davina's email in chat right now so people have that, because we do want to make sure that you receive the invitation to your local
and I've been putting the actual registration information in the chat, but this way we can make sure you're on our email address.
Great. Okay. So I see requests for pushing the date out into the fall, so just we'll take note of that and share that with CDE. I also see a question about the 15% to pay for individuals. So in the workshop, we are going to cover what the allowable expenditures are for that 15%, and also not just what's allowable, but what would be allowable based on your root cause analysis. It's very important because I can't just answer that, yes, you can pay for an individual, because in fact, you end up needing to show whatever you're paying for, that ties back to your root cause, and again, what the factors were that have you in disproportionality or significant disproportionality. So. Okay, let me move on a little bit to the process that we actually will lead you through in order to develop the CCEIS plan. So it's what we call our 4-phase process. It's for programmatic improvement, and it basically takes you through a root cause process to come up with a plan, identify your root causes, and come up with a plan to address that. It is one that is different from some other improvement processes in that you'll notice that blue bar there that talks about applying a cultural lens throughout the 4-phase process. This was developed with national experts, very much with the specificity of looking at race and ethnicity and making sure that when you're looking at improving your processes, you're looking at them with a cultural lens and always looking at the differences in terms of what services are available, what supports are available, and what's not available to your different student populations. So as I mentioned, it was put together with the support of national experts, and it's tied on implementation science based on that, and our 4-phase process very much aligns with, in implementation science, their implementation stages. Those stages typically take 2 to 4 years to complete. It's another thing that we want to make sure is important in your consideration of this. If you're doing a thorough, robust job of addressing the issues that have you in significant disproportionality, it's not something you're going to see change in a real quick way. It typically does take 2 to 4 years for true change. That doesn't mean you won't see improvements, but to have full implementation of what you hope to have in place is going to take some time. It also has features that are very much in alignment with improvement science, so things like investigating the system, using data to decide what you should be doing and what's not working, developing your theories based on data, and then learning from practice, from what you actually do, and consolidating what works. You'll definitely see some similarities between the work that has been done in improvement science, and if you're in differentiated assistance, it's not something that should feel, completely foreign to you. So we, as I mentioned, in the workshops that we're going to talk about a little bit later, we are going to go in more detail on the 4 phases. Okay, so stop.
Yeah, so does attendance at the workshops count towards the 10 hours of working with the TA facilitator?
So that's a good question. Your 10 hours of working with the TA facilitator is really what you track and what you pay for. So if you were to bring a TA facilitator to the workshop, that could be a part of your 10 days.
10 hours. 10 hours.
Sorry. I say 10, and I'll tell you why. Because although the minimum mandate is 10 hours, in our experience doing this work, the folks that really do, again, a thorough job and get the support that they need from a technical assistance facilitator, they tend to contract for closer to 10 days. I know that's not always possible, particularly in small rural districts. You cannot spend that much money. And again, that's part of the reason why we're trying to create a model of support that allows for more shared resources, because you do want to have your funds going towards services for students and not expending too much of it on support, even though we know that it's helpful in creating a better plan. You do need to limit that. But in any case, you will want to talk with a TA facilitator and make some decisions about where do you most need their support. So we're not going to tell you you need to use them for, root cause analysis. You need to use them for focus groups. We're not going to tell you that. That's up to your LEA, and so you should have conversation with the TA facilitator after you've had some more information and some time to digest this as to where do you most need the support, particularly if you have very limited funds and know that you can't do much beyond the 10 hours. Again, another place to look would be for your SELPA. Is there a way to get more support through your SELPA to your LEA and the TA facilitator? I hope that answered that. Yeah. Okay. So let me just briefly go into our 4-phase process. We're going to end up talking much more about this during our face-to-face workshops, but we do really want to make sure that after this webinar, you have some information so that you can take your first steps in starting the work that needs to be completed. So what we're going to talk about today are those steps within phase 1. So just the overview, phase 1, the steps that are included that are identifying and convening a leadership team and stakeholder group. So we're going to talk about what that means. Contacting SPP-TAP at NCOE. We'll talk a little bit more about that, although you're obviously doing that right now. Choosing a TA facilitator. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And gathering relevant data. So I'm going to go ahead and go into those steps. The ones that we'll talk about in, Susan's rushing through the other 3 because, again, we'll be talking about those more in the face-to-face. But just to know that all of those steps are described on our website, and there's more information on them if you want to get more of a head start. The actual SEP, Special Education Plan, that Jack talked about earlier, will be available, we've been told, on February 14th. That is tomorrow. So again, going back to the link that was in your in the letter that you received, the annual determination letter, the Padlet, that link would take you to the Padlet, and that's where you would find the SEP. I know there's going to be additional support to LEAs on how to complete the SEP. The CCEIS plan is just a portion of that because you can be required to complete a SEP based on also intensive review. And so there's more that is in that plan. And Jack, I don't know if you want to add any more to this conversation at this point?
Yeah, all those documents, and somebody asked this on the Padlet, they will be available tomorrow. But if you're concerned about the SEP or you have questions about the SEP, we're going to provide workshops for that as well, and you're also going to have a consultant that can help you with that too. So look for that tomorrow.
Okay, great. Thank you. So one of the other documents that we will definitely be sharing with you, we're not quite sure what format it will be in, but as we've been doing this work, it's really important that LEAs don't feel like there's some kind of guesswork behind what CDE is looking for. When you submit a CCEIS plan, you will need to have it approved prior to beginning implementing services for students or staff. So before you're actually spending your money on the implementation of the plan, you need to have it approved by CDE. So nobody wants you to be writing a plan where you're not quite sure whether or not you're meeting the requirements that CDE is expectations. So we do provide a guidance document, and when we meet with you through the CCEIS workshops, you'll get more information on this. And when we get a finalized version, it really needs to align with the SEP because we want to make sure that it's clear as you're filling out the SEP that you can see sort of step by step what's being asked of you. So it will be updated based on the new SEP, and then we will also have that available on our SPP-TAP website. So again, just know that you'll be getting that level of information. Okay, so this is just a screenshot of our website. We wanted to show you where some of the resources are. So the CCEIS plans, we have a tab under Significant Disproportionality that's specific to the guidance documents and forms. If you were to go on there right now, there's a tab for the year 2020. So it's based on the year of identification because, again, these forms and documents change year to year. So if you go on the website and you notice that the forms for 2020 aren't there, that doesn't mean you should go to 2019 and use those forms because they won't be appropriate any longer, okay? But if you were identified in 2019, those forms, for instance, the progress reports, at this point would still be the ones that you use and for that year of identification. So I just want to make sure that we do keep the guidance documents and forms up there for the 3 years that LEAs would need access to them.
And any forms that or documents that are not currently there are because they have not been finalized by CDE. So once they are finalized, they will be put up on our website as well.
Okay. And then we have information also on the cultural lens. So there are resources. We actually have a directory of, I don't know how many different resources that support the cultural lens and the work that can be done around that. There's obviously information also on the 4-phase process. That's where you'll find some of our archived webinars as well as the e-learning modules. And then I mentioned previously the TA facilitators. So again, there's each of them have links with their individual bios that has information on their location, has information on their areas of expertise, and obviously their contact information. Okay. So we are going to talk about next steps. Again, we recognize this is a very quick way to give you a lot of information, but we do want to make sure you have enough information on what to do next. So I'm noticing that there's a question that I want to make sure is answered. How does the CCEIS plan relate to the SEP? So Jack, do you want to take a minute to answer that?
Sure. So the whole idea with the special education plan is that whatever monitoring activities that an LEA is involved with in regards to the California Department of Education, it's all going to be available in that special education plan. And we did that so that there's not 7 or 8 different areas for you to look at or consultants for you to work with. You have one consultant, you have one plan. Depending on what you've qualified for in terms of a review, whether it's targeted, intensive, whether you're significantly disproportionate, those different things will determine what you complete, the contents of your special education plan. But we wanted to encompass all of your monitoring activities within one plan. It's just a lot easier to understand. It's a lot less confusing, I think, than it has been in the past.
Okay, thank you. So I'm seeing some questions about the leadership team, and so I'm going to we're going to talk about these next steps in a little bit more detail, so I'll definitely be answering that. So as I mentioned, we're going to start with working on phase 1. We're hoping that after you get off this webinar, you can start beginning some of those tasks right away with the important members of your team. So if you'll notice that you'll see identifying a leadership team and identifying a stakeholder group are 2 of the activities that we want you to complete before attending workshop A. They're not activities just in terms of identification that will take you that long, but you will need to gather the right members of your folks to have conversations about that. So we're also going to talk obviously about attending the workshop. That is a required activity in phase 1. And then contracting with a TA facilitator is something, again, you'll want to begin looking at and making decisions about. It can take a while. I think we're actually going to talk about all of these in a little bit more detail. So I'll talk about why you want to start that now, and then contacting us and gathering relevant data. And again, we will be looking at data during those workshops. It's another thing we'll be asking you to do or be bringing. So let's talk about the leadership team. So basically, the leadership team should be a minimum of 3 cabinet-level decision makers. So these are the folks that are responsible for the oversight of the CCEIS plan. And they should include representatives of both general education and special education at the district level. So if you remember, we talked earlier about why this collaboration is so important. This is not a special education task, okay? The money and the implementation of the plan is going to be handled in general education. It's unfortunate that we have this system where there's 2 different houses. It really is done in collaboration, and definitely the development of the plan should be done in collaboration between both sides of the house. The reason you need these decision makers also is as you're doing the root cause analysis and having your stakeholder group take a look at what they discover within your district, the different data that's available to them. They're going to be making some recommendations, obviously, based on that. They're going to be coming up with their theories, and the leadership team needs to be involved and informed of those activities. Otherwise, you don't end up with, you can have a great plan, but you won't get it approved, right? And that leadership team really needs to be able to make those decisions. So if it's not a superintendent, it needs to have folks that have authority to make decisions at that level and direct access to the superintendent, because when that superintendent is asked to sign the plan, you really need to make sure that they're, again, on board with approving. In terms of a minimum number, because somebody had asked that, as we said, minimum 3, this is going to depend a lot depending on your LEA. You don't want to have so many people there at that decision level making that it becomes too difficult to make decisions. We typically see something like 3 to 6 members there, but again, that depends on the size of the LEA. Okay. Identifying the stakeholder group. The stakeholder group, this is a really important piece of the work. If you don't start out with the right members on your stakeholder group, you will not end up with a good plan. We know that from experience. It just doesn't happen. You really want to make sure that you have a diverse group of parents and community members, and those parents or those community members include representatives of the identified racial or ethnic category that you're identified under. So you're not looking for parents that are already, for instance, you don't want parents who are also employees of your LEA. You want parents who are community members, and you also don't want to make sure you're not restricting your parent participation to those parents that are already heavily engaged with your LEA. Because, again, the work is around those students that are not as engaged as your other student groups, and that you're not reaching for whatever reason. They're not receiving they're not responding in the same way that some of your other students are that are performing better and doing well. So you do want to make sure that you're actually reaching out to those parents who you have not had the best ability to interact with yet. So that's going to take a little bit of time, and you'll want to do some strategizing around that. You also want to make sure that you have appropriate grade level general and special education teachers. So have some folks that are involved in the implementation of the work at the table when you're doing this work. You want fiscal administration, because obviously you're making decisions that affect your budgets, both your special education budget and your general education budget. So you want to have those folks there. Bargaining unit representatives are very important. Again, you don't want to create a plan that then, once you've decided what's going to be implemented, later on you actually have challenges or barriers in making those things happen because you didn't have the right people at the table to help you figure out what are the challenges going to be, what are the barriers going to be, so you can work those out prior to sending the plan in for CDE to approve, right, that then can't be implemented. We do have forms that are available for the stakeholder group and the leadership team on the website, and they provide a little bit more detail about the appropriate members of those teams. Thank you for sharing that. Okay.
There was a question about, do parents need to be special education parents, or can they be general education parents as well?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't think it necessarily has to be one or the other. I mean, again, ideally, you're not having, again, just one parent. So if you could cover both, that's great. What you want to be able to, and, we'll talk about this a little bit more as you gather data, you really want to be able to hear the experience of those parents in your LEA. So as you're doing root cause analysis, you might discover, for instance, that if you have parents in the special education that have students with IEPs, you might discover that what you're not hearing from are parents where their students are struggling but they're not yet identified and what services they weren't receiving. So that's going to be, again, LEA by LEA, but there are other ways to get information from parents, and it doesn't all have to happen through the stakeholder group. So things like focus groups and empathy interviews and other parent meetings where you're getting a broader input from a broader part of your parent population. So in terms of who's actually sitting at the table, that may just be a matter of numbers. And for the stakeholder group, the numbers usually are somewhere between 12 and 25. It can vary. There's no one size that fits. So consider that.
And what do you mean by grade level general ed and special ed teachers?
So appropriate grade level. Again, if you are looking to provide services at the younger grades and you have a high school, a content teacher, that may not be the best person. So again, you'll do some strategizing as you're deciding, even though you haven't decided what you're going to do yet, what are the areas that we're probably going to be intervening. And it's important to know that your stakeholder meetings are going to happen more than once, so you'll bring this group together more than once. So you might bring the first group together, and again, a TA facilitator could help you decide who's appropriate based on what you're identified and so on. But you might bring that group together once and then actually find out during that process that, oh, we're missing someone, and can bring them into the next one. So these are recommendations, and they're important to consider, but if you find that you've made a mistake, that doesn't mean that it's not too late, either to get them to the table or to find other ways to get information from those groups. So again, you could end up doing some meetings, some focus groups with teachers at all grade levels, and then based on that, decide who's going to be on the stakeholder group.
And at this point, too, I think since we have about 20 minutes left and we still have some cover, I'll probably hold questions at this point and won't ask anymore.
Okay. We should have a little bit of time at the end, but yeah, that's fine. The other thing I want to say about the stakeholder group, because it was a very common request, is we know that LEAs have a variety of stakeholders, right? Sometimes they have a stakeholder group for their LCAP. They might have a stakeholder group for some other, for PIR or for something else. It's very important, again, as we talked about the difference between this process being one that has a cultural lens. If you're going to, again, for effectiveness, efficiency, use your same group of stakeholders, start with the most robust and diverse stakeholder group. Don't turn your small group that doesn't have, bargaining unit representation or doesn't have parents involved and turn that into your CCEIS stakeholder group, because it won't work for you. You need to have the right people around the table in order to get the results that you want. Okay, so selecting a TA facilitator. Again, just a reminder that there are different ways to work with a TA facilitator. I know I've said some things about this already, but one of the things to consider is you're going to have a contracting process. All LEAs are different, but I know that some of them, they need to go to the board for approval. CDE will be asking you who you've contracted with, and in order to start the work, you want to make sure that you have a contract in place. So I know folks, again, they're independent contractors, so they can make their own decisions about how much they're willing to do prior to having a full-on signed contract, but you want to start that process as soon as possible. Folks have asked already about what if there aren't enough. This may be the situation where when people have a signed contract, that's who they're working with and not able to say yes to others that are still in process. So definitely encourage you to get on that, those decisions as soon as possible. Contacting us, we want to make sure you have our contact information. There's my phone and email address, and Susan Stewart, who's sitting right next to me, our program specialist, her contact information as well. We are the two that will be going face-to-face. We'll be at all of the workshops that are coming up, the CCEIS workshops. So you'll see us there, but if you need to reach us, and if we're a little slow in responding, it's probably because we're on the road, but we will get back to you as soon as we can. So please do reach out. And then there's the CDE, the 2 contact numbers right there as well for the 2 different FMTA units. So if you have your FMTA consultant's contact, that's great. If you don't, those are the numbers you can reach out to get your questions answered. Okay. So another step in the phase 1 is gathering relevant data. This is a visual we've put together to make the point that when we talk about the data that you're going to look at, we're not talking just about what came with your identification letter. Okay, that was very specific to the cells and the risk ratios and the different areas that you're out in. What you really want to be looking at is just looking at this sort of rainbow of data sources. You're going to be looking at these various other places where you do have data collected, and not just what's not working, but who are the students that are successful. So you're going to be looking at things like graduation and achievement data. You're going to be looking at AP courses and who has access to those, and how all of that ties into the students that are not being served, or the different areas in which you can have impact. So we are asking for Workshop A that you, again, begin gathering this. We know, especially those of you that we're going to see real soon, you may not yet have a lot of it together, but We have also a document on our website that lists some of the recommended areas of data that you're looking at.
It's not there yet, but it will be there in the next day or two.
Okay, great. Okay, so we wanted to make sure you had the dates. Again, as Jen mentioned, if you have not received that invitation, please do reach out to us. We want to make sure that you get those invitations. And if you are aware of somebody in your team that should have gotten an invitation and didn't, again, please just let us know. We'll add them to our list. But those are the 8 locations that we're coming to starting next Friday in Sacramento and ending March 11th in San Jose. They are day-long workshops. It's a slightly different based on the location. So I know, for instance, San Diego, the one that's in National City, is starting a little bit later than the others. They start typically from 10 and go until 3:30. There's a lunch break. Again, when you sign up, you will get the information that's specific to the event that you sign up for. And we want to give you choice. So even though, let's just say, Sacramento is closer to you, if the Stockton date is actually better for you and you're willing to travel to that, please feel free to register for Stockton. That's okay. We know they're coming up soon and want to have them be as convenient for you as possible. But when you sign up in the registration, you'll get to choose which one you register for, and then you will get more information. But as I said, they're day-long events. We try to make them with a slightly later start and a slightly earlier ending so that you could travel to and from, hopefully without an overnight. I know that's not possible for everyone, but again, we want to keep you from expending your CCEIS dollars if you don't have to.
And I did want to let folks know that although the locations look different, the locations that are on the screen are the actual cities. They're the more specific information. We wanted you to know exactly where in San Joaquin we would be going and where in the San Diego area we would be going. So that's why there's different information.
Yeah. And Sacramento is from 10 to 4, so I want to make sure people have the correct information on that.
And the invitations were sent out a couple of days ago, and they went to special education directors, SELPA directors, and superintendents. So if you have not received one and you're one of those 3 people, let us know, and we'll get the information to you. And otherwise, we will. You can check in with the other folks.
Okay, so I'm going to keep moving. I want to make sure we get through our material. We're getting to the end here. So what to bring to the workshop. So I mentioned this just a little while ago, that you are to bring your completed leadership and stakeholder identification worksheet. This doesn't necessarily, especially for the first ones that are coming in, it doesn't necessarily mean that you already have all of those folks approved to be a part of this process. Obviously, if we're meeting with you in March, hopefully you already have that. But if you're coming into Sacramento, maybe that's not enough time for you. But certainly you have enough time to sit down and start thinking about who should be included in that process. We also want you to bring the list of scheduled meetings. So as you start to schedule when and how you will meet, again, to be able to meet that August 15th deadline, your FMTA consultants will be asking for that information at the first workshop. And now I'm thinking I probably didn't say that out loud, that the FMTA consultants will be at the workshops, and it varies workshop to workshop who will be present. But the things that we're asking you to bring will actually be reviewed by the FMTA consultants while you're there at the workshop. We also want you to bring the list of relevant data sources. So again, as you're beginning to figure out what you need to look at and maybe finding out where you need to get the data from, that's what we want you to bring. So again, so we can give you some feedback about whether or not there's something you're missing and help you earlier in the process rather than later in the process discovering that something didn't happen in these first steps that was important. And the name of the TA facilitator. So if you have at this point decided who you would like to be working with or who you already are working with, again, they'll be asking for that at that workshop. So there is a target date for completion for both phases 1 and phases 2. And obviously we haven't even started talking about phase 2 right now, or you'll get that during those first round of face-to-face workshops. So April 13th is when CDE will be asking for you to provide information on your completion of phase 1 and phase 2. So there'll be some check-in points, and that will be the one, April 13th. So you'll want to put that on your calendar. And the second round of workshops, we're calling them CCEIS Workshop B. Again, our phases have numbers, so we're trying to stay away from numbers. So Workshop B will be coming back starting April, and there are 9 of those that will be scheduled. You can see the first 3 that are scheduled: April 22nd in Roanoke Park, April 23rd in San Jose, and April 27th in Roanoke Park?
Sacramento.
In Sacramento, sorry. As I said, we have more that will be scheduled. They will be completed in May. We're hoping before Memorial Day weekend. That's the plan for those. Again, those will be similar full-day workshops. They will be much more team-oriented. At that point, you'll be looking at your root causes. You'll be developing your plan, basically creating your measurable outcomes. If you haven't done already, you'll be getting help with those. If you've done those already, you'll be getting feedback on what you're proposing. So those we will ask for more of your team members to participate in those so that they can be part of the consultation time with your FMTA consultants. And we will have a couple TA facilitators joining us at those workshops as well.
And I just want to reiterate, if you did not receive an invitation, please email us because we don't have your emails connected to the Zoom room. So then I'm going to just tell you what the email address is. It's also in chat. It's D as in dog, gallon, G-A-L-L-O-N, like a gallon of milk. So D gallon at NAPA, NAPACOE.org. And again, that will be in chat so that if you don't find your invitation or didn't get one, you can let us know exactly who needs to get the information, and we'll get it out to you ASAP.
And I do want to thank the folks that are speaking up about being willing to host a session. Thank you very much. We are very appreciative of that. We set up, I do want to say that we set up the first round of workshops when we were working off a preliminary list. We knew all of this had to happen very fast. So we're open to changing some potential locations of the next round. Mainly our priority is getting as close to as many of you as possible. So please don't be hurt if we don't take you up on your offer. We're really, as I said, trying to make it as convenient for as many people as possible. So thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the important dates.
We've had quite a few people ask about Workshop A. We will not be hosting any more Workshop A's. These are the set dates, and there will not be any others.
Yes.
But you can go to a date and a location other than your immediate area. So if for some reason the workshop in your area is just not doable, look out further afield and see if there are some locations that will work better for you.
And what happens if they're not able to attend a Workshop A? The dates and locations just do not work for their team.
I would say contact CDE. Or Jack, I don't know if you have an answer for that right now.
Yeah, I would let your consultant know, and we'll brainstorm through your consultant.
Yeah. I do want to say there's going to be some very important information provided during those workshops. So it's part of the reason why, especially with the short notice, we haven't asked for a full team to participate in that workshop. It is one of those where someone could come to represent your LEA, and then they'll share the information back. And it doesn't mean that we can't follow up with you with more help and support. But again, it is a full day of information. So.
And is it similar to last year's workshop that was in the Monterey area?
It is similar. It is similar, yeah. It's closer to the regional session, so we did a couple of workshops last year. This year, our regional session has turned into this webinar and the first workshop. So I recognize that there are some folks on the line that have done these workshops before, and that would be another consideration, that there's probably information that you have received and only some small changes if you've been identified in previous years. But I know most people this is new to, so be very important for those that are new. So again, reiterating some of the important dates, August 15th is when the CCS plans are due, and you will be getting more information about how those are actually submitted and what the plan looks like. And then January 10th is when the first progress report is due, and that's January 10th, obviously, of 2021. So some takeaways. We want to make sure you sign up for a regional CCEIS Workshop A, and you will be getting, again, a follow-up email that has more of the specifics for that workshop. Things like parking and that kind of stuff. So you will have the time from the registration form, but things like parking and what's happening with the lunch and all that would be in your follow-up email. We want to make sure that you download and complete the leadership and stakeholder identification worksheet so that you can complete those and have them ready for Workshop A, and also that you begin gathering the relevant data that you want to bring to Workshop A and start getting some feedback and some guidance from your FMTA consultants and from Susan and myself at those workshops. So,
there's a couple more questions.
I just wanted to say that, because people may not know, this is our last slide. So we are going to take questions as we can, and if you end up, if you have to leave right now, I don't want you to feel like, you can't, but we will go ahead and take the few questions if you guys want to let me know. Do the plans need to be board approved by local boards or just signed by superintendents? So again, this is one that I'm not absolutely positive on. Our last year's plan did have to be approved by the LEA board chair, so in addition to the superintendent. I don't know if that's what's going to be on the new SEP. So you should know that tomorrow when the plan comes out, right?
Is there information available about the number of LEAs in Sig Dis for each indicator?
That's a very good question. It's actually a table that we have put into our presentation for our workshops when we go out face-to-face. So we are providing that information. I think you guys know all of this is happening very quickly, so we have the list, but we also have small changes that are happening here and there. So we do want to provide that, and it actually will be used for our purposes in helping us create the new structure for the community of practice meetings. We will not be doing community of practice meetings with 130, LEAs. We will end up dividing them in some way so that they're either by type of LEA or perhaps indicators that they're out in. So just wanted to say that.
Here's a question about how do you recommend writing a plan to expend funds, change policies, et cetera, if current 2019 data indicates we are no longer meeting the Sig Dis criteria?
That is a really good question. I can tell you that the way the federal regulations work, because you were identified, I don't believe that there is a way to make a change in terms of what needs to be moved going forward. But if you're no longer identified as being Sig Dis, then I would take a look at that root cause analysis as sort of moving backwards, like backward mapping. What got you out? So there must be some things that you have done in the last few years that actually have improved your numbers. And those are the things that I would end up looking at how to augment, because you cannot supplant with these funds. But what can you do sort of tied to that, related to that, to enhance that, so that you continue to have your numbers improve so that you don't get identified again? It sounds like you may not be identified next year. But you also want to look at your other areas, because sometimes when you're no longer identified in one particular cell, you might then be identified in a different cell. So you'll still want to go through the root cause analysis process and look at all of the different areas, and then again, through that process, hopefully identify what's been working well for you and do more of that. So that's what I would recommend. That's a very brief, I haven't seen your data, I don't know everything else that's going on, but it's a general, broad overview, I guess, recommendation.
Okay. All right. Jen, were there any other questions that came up that we didn't get a chance to talk about? I know there's probably some that are buried in the chat that we'll have to address later, but was there anything else that you remember?
I think those were the main ones
at
this point that haven't been re-asked already.
Okay. Well, I want to go ahead and hand it back to Jack then, and thank everyone for being here, and let you wrap it up and say our goodbyes, and we'll be seeing as many of you as we can very soon. Thank you.
Yeah, so we just want to appreciate everybody's time. I'll pass along some of the concerns that people had with timeline. Also, it's really important that you get to know who your FMTA consultant is. Those two numbers from this PowerPoint, those go to our unit lines, and the folks that answer those phones can help you find out, if you don't already know, who your FMTA consultant is, and that person would be a great person. We're going to be reaching out to, but that's going to be a really key person to get to know, and we're really pleased with the folks that we have. So I appreciate it. We look forward to working collaboratively with you, and have a great rest of your day.